Last time, we told the story of 9 Soviet hikers who set out for the northern Ural Mountains in January 1959. 9 exceptional people: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kalmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Krivonischenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov. We told you about the journey, about the last diary entries, about the camp newspaper they produced that final evening on the slope of Dead Mountain, the jokes they made, the high spirits they had, and then we told you what the search party found on February 26, 1959, the tent, cut open from the inside, their boots still inside, their coats still inside, their survival equipment untouched, 9 sets of footprints leading away from the tent down the slope into -40 degrees without the things they needed to survive, and the first 5 bodies, found near a cedar tree at the Tree-Line. Krivonischenko with 3rd-degree burns on his hands. Dyatlov and Kalmogorova apparently trying to return to the tent when they died. Slobodin with a skull fracture and no external wound. All 5 officially determined to have died of hypothermia, but 4 bodies still missing, hidden under 4 meters of snow in a ravine, not found until May, when the snow began to melt. This is episode 2. This is what the snow was hiding, and this is where the Dyatlov Pass incident stops being a mystery about why people died in the cold, and becomes something much darker, something that has no satisfying explanation even today, 65 years later. I want to tell you about the search in the weeks between February 26th and May 4th, 1959, because those weeks matter. The search party had found 5 bodies. They knew there were 4 more. They knew roughly where they should be. The footprints led to the cedar tree. From the cedar tree there should have been more footprints, more evidence of where the remaining 4 had gone. But the snow had covered everything. The searchers used avalanche probes, long metal poles pushed into the snow at regular intervals to feel for anything solid underneath. They searched the ravine area below the cedar tree. They searched the surrounding forest. They probed the snowfields methodically. They found nothing. The snow that winter in the northern Urals was deep and continuous. It had been falling and accumulating since November. By the time the search party arrived in late February, the snow in the ravine was 4 meters deep in places. 4 meters. More than 13 feet of snow. The remaining 4 hikers were under all of that. The search party probed above them and found nothing. The probes were not long enough, or they hit a slightly wrong angle, or the snow had redistributed above the den in a way that made it feel like solid ground rather than a cavity. For more than 2 months, the final 4 members of the Dyatlov group lay under 4 meters of snow while the search continued above them. And then on May 4th, 1959, a Mansi hunter following his dog through the forest noticed something. Cut branches, arranged in what appeared to be a trail. Someone had cut branches from the trees and laid them on the ground, creating a path, a marker, the kind of thing a person does when they want to be found, or when they want to find their way back. The hunter followed the trail. It led 50 meters further into the woods from the cedar tree, into the ravine, and there, protruding very slightly from the surface of the snow, the edge of something man-made, he began to dig, and what he found under those 4 meters of snow changed the investigation completely. The den was extraordinary, not because of what it contained, but because of what it showed about the people who built it. It was a snow shelter, dug into the side of the ravine, reinforced with branches, large enough to hold several people, built with the kind of skill and efficiency that comes from years of winter camping experience. These 4 people, after whatever had driven them from their tent, after running barefoot through -40-degree darkness for a mile and a half, after watching their friends die at the cedar tree fire, had built a shelter. They had assessed their situation. They had used what the forest gave them. They had done what trained winter hikers do in a survival situation. They had tried to survive. This is important to understand. These were not panicking people who simply gave up and lay down in the snow. These were people fighting, using everything they knew, everything they had trained for, everything that years of difficult expeditions had taught them. The den they built was real. It was practical. It was the correct response to their situation. And it was not enough, because something else had already happened to them. Something that no amount of shelter-building skill could have addressed. Something that had happened to their bodies before they ever reached the ravine. The injuries that the investigators found when they excavated those 4 bodies from the snow were not the injuries of people who had died of cold. They were the injuries of people who had already been destroyed by something else, before the cold ever reached them. I need to tell you exactly what the investigators found when they examined the final 4 bodies. Because the details matter. Because the details are the reason this case has never been closed to anyone's satisfaction. Nikolai Thibault Brignol. He had a major skull fracture, not the small crack found in Slobodin among the first 5. A major fracture, the kind that results from significant force applied to the skull. But again, no external wound, no cut, no bruise on the skin above the fracture. The skin was intact. The damage was entirely inside. Semyon Zolotaryov, the Second World War veteran, the 38-year-old sports instructor who had survived things those 20-year-olds could not imagine. He had massive chest trauma, multiple ribs broken. The right side of his chest was fractured in a pattern that investigators described as consistent with being struck by an enormous force. No external damage to the skin. The injuries were internal, as if something had struck him through his body without touching the surface. His eye sockets were empty, both of them. His eyes were gone. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, the woman who had skied 50 miles to a clinic rather than slow her group down. The most physically determined person on the expedition. She had the most severe injuries of anyone in the group. Her chest was fractured even more extensively than Zolotaryov's. 4 ribs broken on the right side, 7 on the left. A massive hemorrhage in the right atrium of her heart. Her left thigh bruised deeply. Her nose cartilage broken and flattened. No external soft tissue damage. Her eye sockets were empty, and her tongue was gone. The muscles in the floor of her mouth had been removed, not cut with a blade. Removed. And according to one medical analysis, the amount of blood found in her stomach suggested this had occurred while she was still alive. While she was still alive. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, the woman who was so tough she skied 50 miles after being shot, was alive when her tongue was removed. How? By what? These are the questions the investigation could not answer. These are the questions that 65 years of theories have not answered. Alexander Kolevatov, the altruist, the quiet one, the person on whom every expedition quietly depended. He had a broken nose, an open wound behind his ear, a deformed neck. The investigators could not determine whether the neck deformation was a fracture or a dislocation or something else entirely. He had no eyes either. For people found under 4 meters of snow, 3 of them missing their eyes, 1 of them missing her tongue, all of them with injuries that the forensic investigator stated could not have been caused by any human being because the force required was too great, and none of them with a scratch on their skin. There is one more detail that I need to tell you about: the clothing. When the investigators examined the clothing of the hikers recovered from both the surface and the ravine, they found something that changed the entire investigation. Several items of clothing tested positive for radioactive contamination. Not all of the clothing, not uniformly distributed, but specific items, on specific bodies, showing significant levels of beta radiation. From 9 hikers who had been camping in a remote area of the Ural Mountains far from any known source of radioactive material, the investigation noted this finding, documented it, added it to the file. And then the file was classified. The Soviet government sealed everything. The autopsy reports, the investigation findings, the radiation testing results, the testimony of the search party, all of it, locked away in a secret archive that was not open to the public for decades. The official conclusion was issued in May 1959. A compelling natural force. No guilty party. Case closed. The investigators were ordered to stop their work. Some of them later said they had been told explicitly not to pursue certain lines of inquiry, not to ask certain questions, not to follow certain evidence. What evidence? What questions were they told not to ask? We do not know, because those conversations were not written down. Or if they were written down, they were among the materials that were classified. What we know is this. 9 hikers went to Dead Mountain in February 1959. They were found with injuries that defy explanation by any natural cause. Their clothing was contaminated with radiation from an unknown source. Witnesses in the area reported seeing glowing orange spheres floating in the night sky over the northern Urals around the time the group died. The Soviet government classified the investigation and ordered it closed, and issued an explanation that explained nothing. A compelling natural force. This is episode 2 of the Dyatlov Pass. The injuries that no one could explain. The radiation that had no source. The eyes that were missing. The tongue that was gone. The Soviet government that sealed everything and said nothing. What the theories are. What researchers have spent 65 years trying to prove. And which theories come closest to explaining all of the evidence. That is a story for episode 3. Subscribe to Grey Archive Tales. And come back. We will be waiting. Before I end this episode, want to tell you something that most accounts of the Dyatlov Pass leave out. Because most accounts focus on the horror, on the injuries, on the radiation, on the missing eyes and the missing tongue and the classified files. And all of that is real. All of that is documented. All of that deserves the attention it gets. But what gets left out is this. The final 4, the people in the ravine. Dubinina and Zolotaryov and Thibault-Brignol and Kolevatov. They had taken clothing from the people who died first. The investigators found this when they examined the bodies. Dubinina was wearing a piece of burned clothing. Clothing that had been burned in the fire at the cedar tree. Clothing that had belonged to Krivonischenko or Doroshenko. The men who died first. Who died at the fire. Someone had taken clothing from the bodies of the people who died first and given it to the people who were still alive. In the darkness, in -40 degrees, with injuries we cannot fully explain. With 4 meters of snow eventually covering them. Someone took care of the people who were still alive. Someone stripped clothing from the dead to give to the living. That is not the act of people who were panicking. That is not the act of people who had lost their minds to cold or fear or whatever else was happening on that mountain. That is the act of people who were still thinking, still caring, still doing what human beings do for each other when everything is falling apart. Looking after each other. Until they could not anymore. I think about that often, about what those final hours must have looked like. In that den, under the snow, with the cold pressing in from every direction and the injuries that should not have been possible and the darkness complete. And someone, one of those 4 people, taking the burned jacket of a dead friend and putting it on someone who was still alive, because it was the right thing to do. Because that is what you do when you care about the people around you. Even at the end, even when everything is lost, they took care of each other until they could not. This is episode 2 of the Dyatlov Pass. Subscribe to Grey Archive Tales and come back. We will be waiting.